Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie noob nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink is by Akkerman, and was provided by a benefactor, but it's a different one than usual. This one came from Belgium, and I actually don't remember if he said I could say his name or not, so obviously it's a male benefactor, but just in case he doesn't want me to say it, I'll keep it quiet. He sent me some Akkerman ink in this little fish vial. Apparently these are soy sauce packets from sushi, like little sushi meals, and he cleaned it out and he sent me 3 little fish with 3 Akkerman inks, and this one has quite a name. It's Royal Akkermanblauw Uitwasbaar. Oh god. Honestly, I've just been calling it double aught blue because the number, because you know all Akkerman inks have numbers, this one is 00. So I've just been calling it double aught blue. And it's a very lovely shade of blue, a little maybe hint of purple in it, but yeah, so I have it in fish form. But yeah, usually it comes in, you know, the fancy Akkerman bottles. But I'm very thankful to the Belgian benefactor. Just like to express that. And if you enjoy this review, you should thank him too. Now, the pens I used, because apparently I wanted to be thematic, were these. This is a Knox Avicenna with an extra fine nib, but it's slightly on the broad side. I mean, it's, you know, broader for an extra fine, so it's somewhere between a fine and an extra fine. And I don't know if this will show up, but do you see how the nib is lifting away from the feed? No matter what I do, I cannot fix that, and so the only way that it'll write is if it's pretty wet. Luckily, this pen is pretty wet, so that may cause some problems later, but I can talk. This is a Jin Hao X450, and I love my X450s because pretty much all of them have been pretty broad and pretty wet. And this one is, and right now I think it has KWZ Pine Green in it. So, yep. But anyway, so a little bit of a contrast there. Now, I wanted to see if I could find some comparable inks. So here we go. And actually, I got a bunch of potential comparables for this, so I had to narrow it down. I think I had like 9. So I stuck to the closest. So here's Akkerman Double Aught Blue. And here's Pilot Namiki Blue. Similar sort of blue. This one's maybe a little bit bluer, less purple, but it does have little hints of red in it. Here's Monteverde Blue. I'd say it's a little lighter, but color is quite similar. Here's Schaefer Script Blue. Again, maybe a little bit lighter and maybe just teeny, not as saturated. Here's Lamy Blue, which actually my camera is making look lighter, but mostly it's pretty close. It is a little lighter, but it's close. And lastly, Waterman's Florida / Serenity Blue, which again is very similar, but a lot less saturated. So yeah, there's that. I wanted to see what this ink could hold up against, so did some tests. As you can see, water really broke it up. Ooh, really got it moving. 1/3 bleach solution turned it yellow-ish, but also got rid of it pretty good. Ammonia pen flush really started to break it up and get rid of it, but actually I think the water did a slightly better job. And then hydrogen peroxide had it moving around, but also kind of made it freaked out the paper, so I had to sop it up quickly. Sorry, I've got the sniffles. So here's the chromatography, and this is how you're supposed to do the chromatography. You can definitely see where that initial drop was put, that line of ink. And then it's sort of resisting, but there's a pretty solid band from top to bottom almost. And then here's where I let it dry, which admittedly is not how you're supposed to do chromatography. But you can definitely see that that dot got much darker and there's less being pushed up. But there is some, and it's pretty consistent. Alright, on to paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. This really is a lovely shade of blue. It is very, I mean, it's like script, it's like Schaefer Script Blue. It's like Monteverde blue. It's like Lamy blue. It's like Waterman blue. It's a very common shade of blue, but it does have some very nice saturation to it. I hope this will show up in those little smears. See how there's plenty of ink in that, you know? Now, because that extra fine is pretty wet, it took 19 seconds to dry, and yeah, that Jin Hao took 25, and I hope this will show up on camera. See that little bit of red? The camera's not showing it as much, but there's red sheen and sort of like a halo around the darkest parts in that scrubby. So you get that. And then just in the writing, there's some very lovely shading. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread. There's no echo. Very well behaved. But since this is sort of like a medium royal blue, and this paper is so dense, I really wouldn't expect there to be much echo anyway. Now, this had maybe 30 minutes to dry before I did the water test, and you can kind of make out what's at the center, but it is very pale, very, very washed away. And it did dye the page a bit, so it might not be the easiest thing in the world to recover, but I don't know, depends on how motivated you are. Next up is Fabriano paper. It's 85 grams per square meter. It's not as steamroller smooth as Clairefontaine, and it's not ceramic coated the way Rhodia is, and density-wise, it's right in the middle. Now, here the dry times actually improved. That extra fine, even though it's more like a fine and is quite wet, actually took 16 seconds to dry, and that X450 took 19. Again, very saturated. There's plenty of ink in this ink, and actually, I really hope the camera shows this. Please, camera. Please. Please. Do you see that in the scrubbies, the red? It's really not showing it, but in real life, there is just red everywhere. Like, there's plenty of red, and it's in the writing as well. It's all throughout. But yeah, anyways, there's lovely shading. It's a nice shade of blue. It's a simple shade of blue, but it's more saturated than most of the larger name brands version of, like, straight blue. So I was really enjoying it. But yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. I don't think there's any echo. I really don't see any. And since there's sheen, that's quite lovely. But again, this water test, oddly, you can see like a couple of dots. But man, that writing is really gone. It did dye the page a little bit. That would be seriously difficult to try and recover. Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. Now that wet fine / extra fine took 14 seconds to dry. The broad and wet Jin Hao took 17, which really isn't bad. And again, see how saturated this is. And I really, really wish the camera would show this, but there's more of that hazy kind of red sheen all throughout. Why don't you want to play today, camera? Show the sheen. I'm whining. But anyways, yeah, I mean, look at this blue. It's just lovely, right? You get this like really soft shading. It's pleasant. It's a very straightforward blue, and it's quite well behaved. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread. I don't think there's any echo, but I don't know, maybe that's the quadrilateral paper. But yeah, also these pens were very freshly inked. I'd say the ink had been in the pens maximum 12 hours, so I can't say much about how it ages in the pens, but yeah, when it's fresh, it's definitely lovely. Just great. But yeah, it is wet flowing. I'd say it's definitely a 6 out of 10. Like, it's a bit wet. But yeah, water test, it's really, really gone. In fact, the camera's picking that up a lot more than my naked eye can. You can see the dots a bit. Did dye the page, and I think just because it managed to get under, or like around the paper when I was sopping it up, I think that's why that's there. But anyways, next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out dry times and shading and sheen, but it's also very thin, so there can be echo, and I think there kind of is here. I mean, it's mostly in the scrubby or in that broad and wet Jin Hao, or where I was laying it on really thick to try and get some sheen. And if I can't get the sheen on camera right now, something's wrong. Oh, there we go. There. See that? Now, I want you to imagine what you're seeing on camera right now in everything you've seen before. I mean, that, honestly, in real life, that whole thing is just lighting up red. I don't know why the camera's only picking up some of it, but anyways, yeah, this paper does tend to draw out dry time, so that wet fine / extra fine took 18 seconds. The broad and wet Jin Hao only took 23, which really isn't so bad when you see how saturated this ink is. Because even here and here, where it's at its thinnest, it never looks watery. There's like, it looks like the blue is supposed to be this color, you know, like sometimes when ink gets thinned out, it starts to look, you know, like it's undersaturated, but here it doesn't. And look at this lovely shading all through here. It's just great. Sheen for days. But yeah, Tomoe River really doesn't do bleed or feather or spread, just doesn't put up with it. But it also loves to let ink slide away when you add more water, and that is definitely what happened here. In fact, the camera is darkening it up. Oh yeah, another thing, even though it's really sheeny, you know, the sheen doesn't smear after it dries, which I was really, really thankful for. That was me. I put my finger in this B, and then as I was scooting it down the page, I put it again on the paper. So that's me. That's not weird stuff happening. Now the camera's darkening up this water test. It's really, really gone in real life, and you can barely see where it dyed the page, but on camera it's really showing up. But yeah. So don't get it wet is my advice. Now for the next 3 tests, in an effort to be fair, I only use the extra fine on these papers. However, since that extra fine is actually more like a fine, and the only way it writes is if it's pretty wet, and then this ink is pretty wet by itself. Yeah, it's, I don't know how much better of a chance I gave it, but yeah. There is no shading left. There's none at all. However, it's still a fairly pleasant shade of blue. Let me see. Yeah, there we go. So you can really see the difference in line width. So there's that fine, extra fine on Tomoe River. And here's that broad and wet Jin Hao. That's a lot closer. And I'm going to bring this in and try and hold it still. See that feathering? And it's really woolly, but this is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. I mean, chances are you have, whatever you have, no matter what it is, unless you made it yourself, you'll probably get better results than this. It took essentially half a second to dry. It dried almost instantly, or I should say it soaked into the paper almost instantly. You get this like kind of woolly effect. It's not great. And then we get this, and it actually rendered onto the page below in a couple places, including there. And where was it? Oh, there, and there. A lot of the dots, like, you know, there's like a period or the dot of an I. So, yeah, and I mean, where it isn't fully coming through, it's very nearly coming through, and where it's not very nearly coming through, it's throwing off an echo in the back. I mean, I can practically read that, and that's with the bright light coming this direction, so not great. However, more absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out, and that's definitely what happened here. See how that's still really dark, especially compared to the water test we saw before? I mean, there's a lot still there. However, some of it did start to kind of feather and explode. I don't know. Looking at this, if you had to recover that, I think you could. Now next up is Mead Notebook Paper. It's physically thinner than 20-pound paper. It's very common for students in the United States. They give it to us for our lab books. It's very inexpensive, and generally it tends to outperform the 20-pound copier paper, which says something about how awful this is. And it kind of does. You see how the line doesn't get as broad as it did there? However, the last couple of weeks it's been feathering, like a lot. So that's unfortunate, but even here it's not everywhere. Like here, not so much. Here, not so much. Here, yeah. There, yeah. So I can't really explain it. But it took 1.5 seconds to dry. Very solid color, quite enjoyable. Maybe not the best performance, but I mean, considering that just how wet that pen was and then the wet flow, the fact that we got these for results, I'll totally take it. That's good. And there, that was me almost scratching through the paper. But yeah, you get a little bit, but not nearly as bad as it could have been. And this paper tends to freak out when you add water. Kind of did, but we've seen so much worse. What's at the center is pretty clear, pretty there. It's still fairly dark, didn't dye the page. Some of it is starting to feather and kind of explode a bit, but as it is right now, I think you could definitely recover that. Now lastly is Moleskine Paper, which I hate because it is awful, and I don't know how they justify making people pay what they do for this stuff, but moving on. Yeah, look at this. I want you to see this texture. Look at the texture this takes on. It's really kind of gross. I mean, it looks like mold. Like, the texture looks like mold, but yeah. Anyways, and it took 10 seconds to dry, which I cannot explain, because obviously it's absorbent, because it's bleh. And then we get crazy, crazy feathers. And they're just everywhere. And, I mean, they're touching every single letter of every single inch of this paper. It's really quite gross. And I guess you could kind of say you get a little bit of shading, but I say it's not worth it. It's just nasty. And then we get this. I mean, yes, it's a fine, or it's an extra fine that writes more like a fine. It's a wet ink, and it's a wet pen, but, I mean, when Mead did better, considering you can get an entire ream of this stuff for 99 cents, and a notebook this size costs between 12 and 15, I don't know how you justify that, because look, we've got spots coming through all over. It's just gross. And then this paper hates ink, and it hates water, and add them together, and you get this. I mean, if I thought there was bad feathering there, look at what happened when I added water. Just exploded. It's nasty looking. It's really gross. Anyways, there you go for your consideration. Akkerman, Royal Akkermanblauw Uitwasbaar. Yeah, I'm going to stick with double out blue. It's a very nice blue. It's a lot like the standard blues you see from some of the major companies. However, this one is a bit more saturated, which I quite enjoy. And generally, more saturated inks, they sheen a lot easier. So if you're a sheen fan, definitely look into it. Again, today's ink was provided by the wonderful Belgian mysterious benefactor. So if you enjoyed the review, thank him. And yeah, so for your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.